The PS1 was an absolute monster for strategy RPGs. Setting Final Fantasy Tactics aside, it received, 5 different Super Robot Wars games? No, make that like 10. Not even getting into Masou Kishin or Seireki Rayblade here. Got a weird little Dunbine game, tons of front mission, Epic Estella, Brigandine. Point is, it's hard to think of a system as lush with games about raising a gaggle of isometric little guys as the PlayStation X was. Hard market to break into, especially if you were coming into it at the tail end. Unfortunately for a comparatively puny studio Flight Plan, that is exactly what they were doing. Starting small, opening onto the scene with PC Engine shoot-em-up Metamore Jupiter before spending a few years doing contract work, porting bigger budget games from other studios where these guys finally started to break out into their own was with their cult hit Sega Saturn game, Black Matrix, released in 1997. A neat game, and one with a hella proto-2000s goth emo aesthetic in a way I kinda love, but one we can talk about later. While Black Matrix did modestly well for them, enough to earn a couple enhanced ports to the Dreamcast and later the PlayStation itself, Flight Plan was considerably late to the party, getting in on what had ultimately determined itself to be the biggest platform of the generation. While everyone else was gearing up for the early days of the PS2, Flight Plan was only just finishing the final ports of BM, and they'd gotten interested in starting up something entirely fresh, built atop the bones of their existing SRPG engine. Led by scenario writer Shu Miyakozuki, this new game would be a very sharp contrast to Black Matrix's more moody and grim vibes. Something more cute, colorful, lighthearted, albeit still grounded in its own distinct worldview and philosophy. A classical isekai fantasy, one in the vein of contemporarily popular works like Escaflowne and Rayearth. This game, releasing at the very start of 2000, would be known as Summon Night. One quick thing I do want to touch on before we talk about the story is the opening movie, set to the song Kaze no Kokyo-e for the last time. It's weirdly easy to miss, only plays if you sit on the title screen for a little bit. It's not very amazingly animated, animation isn't always about monetary budget in the way people think, but this was clearly not given huge priority by publisher Banpresto. Still, there is a weird charm, and dare I say, a bit of soul to it. My favorite part is this adorable shot of the kids lined up next to their snowmen, and then it pans over to all the little mascot dudes and their own tiny snowmen of themselves. That's so great. I can't talk shit about this. The story of Summon Night starts out in a fairly predictable way, but there's a weird amount of moving parts right off the bat. After choosing from one of the 4 possible protagonists, all illustrated in the distinct style of a 2000s-era Kohaku Kuraboshi, character designer of Kino's Journey, Sword Art Online Alternative Gun Gale Online, and Ninomiya Inanes, we always follow our character, a Japanese high school second year, in our case specifically a more shy, bookish girl named Aya, walking home with a friend, always spotting an underclassman and always given the choice to either keep walking home or to stop and help them out instead. An odd choice to start the game with, leading into our protagonist wistfully reflecting on their current situation in life at this park they've come to for this purpose so many times before. Thoughts about her present and her future. It's not that she feels unhappy with where she is, exactly. Aya's perfectly comfortable with the people she's with. She has no troubles at school. She gets along well with her classmates. Were she to live a normal life, grow up, go to college, find a job, get married, she'd do fine. But there's something nagging at Aya. The idea that all she will be is fine. That if she accepts being fine, she'll forever lose grasp on something far more important. A kind of personal happiness, one only she can hold. Maybe the idea is childish, just stuck in her fantasizing. But still, if that something might exist, she wants to know. Of course, knocking her out of her thoughts, she hears a mysterious voice crying out for help.
助けて。誰か助けて。このままだと壊れてしまう。何もかも消えてしまう。助けて。運命を止めて。この世界を助けて。
Coming to in a crater filled with colored rocks, which we make sure to grab, and also corpses, which we make sure to run away from, screaming at the top of our lungs, we end up in the southern slums of a large fantasy city, being mugged. After fending off the muggers with a box cutter, Aya suddenly unleashes some kind of mysterious light.
Masou!
The other ends up being stopped by his friend, an armor-clad swordsman named Raid,
そこまでだガゼル。レイド
who decides to take us in and hear our story, much to his friend Gazel's displeasure and distrust. Far from dragging us to some den of iniquity, where Aya finds herself as an abandoned orphanage maintained by, essentially, a group of non-tax-paying homeless people, taking care of a trio of orphans, the precocious Fizz, Shy Rami, and boisterous Alba. House chores are managed by the lone woman in the group, Libre, who quickly makes it clear who holds the power in the relationship when she strong-arms Gazel into apologizing for making the kids cry.
またあんたが泣かしたんでしょ。
なんでそうなるんだよ。俺はただこいつらがうるさかったから。
生意気にも口答えなんかしちゃうんだ。それはつまり今晩のご飯はいらないってことね。
ちょっと待て。
ごめんなさいわ。
ちくしょう。
ごめんなさいわ。
ごめんなさい。
よろしい。
Eidos is the shirtless guy, a stonecutter and part-time co-mugger with Gazel when they're running low on cash. And Raid is a former knight who does his best to help the group stay out of trouble while working at a local dojo teaching kids how to handle a sword. But ultimately, even he has to confess, money troubles are too real for him to stop them from what they do. That's just how bad it is here. Surprisingly accepting of Aya's story, they explain what happened to her isn't anything too special. Summoning is the magic of choice for the rich and powerful here in the land of Lindbaum, and as such, summoners are not very well liked, especially not by the common folk of this city, Saigent. If we showed Gazel our Summonite stones at the start, he would have only gotten more pissed off than when we confused him with trying to give him Tokyo cash. What is unusual is being summoned in without a summoner. If you have a summoner, you're basically a servant. If you don't, you're as good as a stray animal. Recognizing how bad our situation is, the group opts to let Aya stay with them until she can get on her feet. This choice prompts several hours of action, adventure, and bonding among the group, as Aya properly joins the gang after helping them out of jam followed by jam, brings more and more friends and comrades into the fold, and unlocks powers of summoning that allow her and everyone else to turn the tides against the larger foes that inevitably come bearing down on them, ranging from the egotistic and ruthless Bonosa, who leads the rival gang known as Obtus, to the local trio of Commonwealth summoners and political superpowers, representing the largest summoner faction known as the Gold Faction, the three Mon brothers. The game has dozens upon dozens of optional side conversations to flesh out the characters, providing detailed histories of their relationships with each other, lots of lore and minutiae about the world of Lindbaum and the local city of Saigent, and just generally funny bits of character interaction. Many of them are accessed chapter by chapter through the game's node-based world map screens, and smaller, more intimate ones are accessed each night via the Night Talk system, a staple of the series. There's lots of fun little threads they weave through these, many of which give you early glimpses of characters you'll meet much later in the game, like Akane the ninja who hails from the Oni world of Siltern, as well as Sizelith and Ilias, the sympathetic captains of the Saigent Royal Knights. Others introduce wholly unique characters you'd never otherwise meet, such as Elka and the mysterious old man, Weasel, and they make a good effort to really go some in-depth ones to just about every character who enters the group. Almost a bit too much. The game clearly struggles to maintain the scale of things as the party balloons in size, but on the other hand, it leads to fun little moments that the game would be much lesser without. Early game side adventures, like helping Swan the Hunter overcome the death of his father and clear the forest of invasive foreign mushrooms from another dimension that are poisoning the local wildlife, a symptom of the ecological impact of reckless, unregulated summoning, lead to further small scenes of Swan hanging with the kids and carving flutes for them. And even the kids themselves get fairly cute stories, like Alba, who struggles with bullying from the other kids at the local dojo over his personal tutelage from Raid Sensei, but with words of support from Aya, he can better convey his struggles to Raid and push through these barriers. Summon Night truly has such a rich cast and setting that it puts so much time and detail into, really hammering in this recurring theme of community and cooperation, that it is really hard to fully break down every little detail it pours in those first few hours of game alone. I can barely scratch the surface. I haven't even gotten into major characters like Kanon, Bonosa's blood brother, a kid born from an interracial relationship between a noble and an Oni, and left orphaned on the street for it.
邪魔すんじゃねえかの。
そう怖い顔しないでくださいよ。そんなに怒ってばかりだと体に良くないですよ。ねえ。
Or the Summoner, your primary romance interest and one of 4 potential characters, decided by those opening choices you make, each one a Lindbaumian reflection of one of the protagonists. The one I ended up with through my choices was Cassis, a mirror to Natsumi.
あんたは一体。
私はカシス。この人がこの世界に来た理由を知ってる女の子だよ。
Beginning as a mysterious summoner who comes in to rescue you from a seriously bad bit of trouble when Bonosa kidnaps one of the kids and holds them hostage, Cassis holds a lot of her secrets in for most of the game, but one thing about her is for certain. She sounds a lot like that voice that called us in here. She said our being summoned was a mistake, that the ceremony went wrong and summoned the wrong thing. But is that really the full story? The only way to find out entirely is to stick close to her the whole way, trusting her to the very end of the journey. Mysterious and secretive as she is, she genuinely cares about Aya as a person, pretty deeply. Like, in a gay way.
え？それってもしかしてデートのお誘いってこと？違うの？つまんないな。だったら行かない。
Which does prompt a bit of referring back to Black Matrix here. Black Matrix's primary defining feature is the gay code. In every version, from the Saturn original to the final release on PS1, you can input a cheat code to, within the game's opening selection of love interests, add a gay dude named Zero. Summon Night 1 basically skips the bullshit and, through the summoner, allows you to more naturally select whether you want to be gay. If you put off walking home with your classmate at the start to take care of your underclassmen of the same gender, then bam, you just picked the gay route. I just think that's really funny, and unique to Summon Night 1, since how endings were changed in the later games basically removed the need for a specific designated romance interest. All in all, it builds a very intimate and nostalgic vibe that resonates throughout the whole experience of Summon Night. A grand-scale yet simplistic fantasy story, focusing on the bonds between a group of people who, without a home, have created one for each other. A game with the balls to say that, yeah, if shit's bad enough, sometimes mugging people for cash to pay for your food is justified, which gives Summon Night this odd friction between its soft, relaxing atmosphere and how actually kinda brutal and sad the shit some of its characters have experienced is, which is where some of the best shit in the game comes from, really. But before we get into more of the story, it's worth talking about the mechanics, because Summon Night is pretty unlike anything else on the system. The most famous sub-series of Summon Night, the Swordcraft Story games, work as very small-scale, single-character action RPGs, in a similar vein to the Tales of series. In contrast, mainline Summon Night is, of course, an isometric strategy RPG. You pick out a gaggle of dudes, build them up, deck them out in gear, and try to use them to outmaneuver the enemy's dudes. Summon Night 1's defining feature is how basic it is. Very raw, stripped down feeling next to a game like FFT or a generation later, Disgaea, and still very raw next to its own sequels. It kinda mingles more with Fire Emblem with its unique centric, smaller scale map design with more fragile units, though less punishing in many ways. Your movement options are basic, your attack options are basic, every unit gets their one move and one action per turn. Movement has no action penalty, so it's always worth doing. The action will be spent if the unit attacks, uses an item, or uses a special move or summon. There are also stances. You can choose whether a unit counters when attacked, like in Fire Emblem, or guards to reduce damage a bit. Countering is usually the optimal strategy unless the unit's physical attack is very weak. Guarding doesn't reduce it enough to be that helpful. Your options in the very early game are very limited. You don't gain access to summoning until you're a couple hours deep, and because of how summoning works, it's hard to get access to too many that early on still. Not to mention, even when you do find one, you kinda gotta waste that turn, because you can't actually see what the summon will do until after you cast it. Thus this footage of me wasting a Ripsy Harpy cast because I don't know if this is going to hurt or heal, and I don't want to hurt my allies, and I don't want to heal my enemy. Additionally, the game lacks two fundamental pieces of quality of life introduced pretty quickly in its own sequels. See, summoning in Summon Night is done mid-battle, based on what accessories your deployed units have equipped and what Summonite stones you use on them. Each colored stone is aspected to a different plane of Summon Night's world, the black being the machine world of Lorelol, the green the nature world of Matrapa, the purple the spirit world of Sabereth, and the red the Oni world of Siltern. There's also white stones. White stones are weird. Nobody knows what white stones actually do. Theoretically, this means the only way to figure out each summon on each accessory is to systematically use every stone on every accessory and just see what you get. Or you could just see what world that accessory is listed as being especially resonant with, shown on the accessory's effects. Even better, you could just consult this handy walkthrough on this official Summon Night 1 website, still archived on the Wayback Machine. Either way though, the game lacks easy ways for you to resupply your Summonite stones. They're only possible to get from battle rewards, which means if you want to resupply when you run dry, you better hope you have a free battle that grants them. This is not always going to be the case, thanks to Summon Night's somewhat obtuse free battle system, which does not tell you which free battle gives which rewards and, for some utterly bizarre reason, erases previous free battle spaces as you progress, locking those rewards off forever. The other problem is that it doesn't mark previously attempted summons, so it's very easy to forget what you've done before. When you do get those summons, though, whoa, you really want to get these. Good summons on a good summoner are almost game-breakingly good. The fun part of summoning working this way is that Summon Night doesn't lock you off from the good shit. One of the first accessories you can buy in the shop, to justify its hefty price tag, gives you a seriously good mid to late game ghost summon called Blackrack that, if you play your cards right, will carry you through all the hardest fights for the first 15 hours or so of the game. Thanks to a combination of a 130 damage cap in a game where unit HP will average near 120 until you're in the end game, and a very reliable mute effect that makes sure the enemy summoners you hit with it will be forced to shut up. This makes summons sound extremely overpowered, and they are, and that's good, but the game does have a balancing act to keep them from being too absurd. MP is a valuable resource, and Summon Night has 0 MP restoration items. This makes you carefully consider each and every summon you use, and gives you a good reason to spread them out among non-summoning focused units, something the game lets you do very easily, since every character has at least one summon equip slot open, though of course ones in the summoner class naturally get more, up to 4. Since every summon is so expensive though, you really have to consider what you fill those slots with sometimes. One of the most important types is unit summons, which each of the 4 worlds get one of. Cute little mascot guys who function as smaller but still deadly mini units. They don't have as many options as your main guys and are especially limited compared to what they get in the sequels, but they still have important utility as more disposable units who can safely take hits and deal damage without putting your main guys in danger. A big risk in this game, since while Summon Night doesn't have any permadeath, it does lack resurrection abilities. If someone bottoms out on HP, they get popped, gone, they're out of the fight until the next one. Hitting a low HP state is even more dangerous than it sounds with that alone. Summon Night's mechanics include a low HP danger state that severely lowers stats. In Summon Night 1, this leads to the game's most comical and abusable AI behavior. When a fighter gets low on HP, they will, with a complete lack of ability to heal themselves, run for the goddamn hills. The only exception is summoners. They'll try and fire off some panic shots while they're on their way out. Kill those guys the very first opportunity you get. With how much there is to keep in mind about summons and how many drawbacks there are to melee, it's easy to forget that physical units can be equally as busted if you play your cards right. There's a variety of weapon types in Summon Night 1, your standard swords, axes, knives, gauntlets, claws, boots, and the like, and some units get 8-directional melee attacks, giving them extra safe room for hitting stuff. The arguable most important weapon types, though, are spears, throwing knives, bows, and guns. Spears hit 2 units in front. Throwing knives have the lowest range of any of the ranged melee weapons, but are accessible very early on, and when equipped on a buffed up gazelle have some pretty absurd damage potential. And bows and guns have the longest range by far, and once again, on the right unit with the right stats, can be absolutely devastating, though you won't get to use guns until you're very late in. Raid, Eidos, and Gazelle are your primary physical units for most of the game, and while Eidos and Raid can be melee powerhouses, their limitations in range and movement are ultimately a huge limitation. Gazelle, though? Gazelle can become a monster. I found myself using him and Akane a lot as the game went on, though the undisputed king of physical damage is, without a doubt, my boy, my man, the mechanical knight in crimson armor right here, Escald. A robot whose arm can be equipped with either one of many melee arm drills and chainsaws, or just replaced with a full automatic rifle. This guy is a damage machine, with absurdly high base levels and stats. Which begs the question, how do levels and stats work? The answer, it turns out, is a bit different from how you might expect. Levels are not gained mid-combat in Summon Night, a system it takes from Black Matrix. You instead earn XP in combat and then distribute it post-battle. The XP pool is saved across fights, so all XP left unspent can be spent after the next fight, or the fight after. As long as the unit participated in the fight and wasn't killed before the end of it, at least. It does at least mean you never run into a situation where a unit is failing to level for failing to get hits in, so that's sort of nice. You want a guy's number to go up? You just make it go up. And making number go up is a lot of what you'll want to be doing in this game, because there are some really important numbers to push up that high. Whenever a unit is leveled up, on top of the flat stat boosts, you get 3 bonus points to distribute as you see fit. These are probably the most important points of the level, thanks to how unique Summon Knight 1's stats are. Strength and Vitality work about as you expect. Damage and defense, all that good stuff. Intelligence is the most important stat, though. You really want to put points into that. It affects magic attack and defense and max MP. This means summoners get naturally high attack and defense. High enough magic attack can punch through an enemy's magic defense to hit them with the full force of a summon's possible damage, and high magic defense makes it much harder for enemies to inflict aforementioned status effects like silence, which means you absolutely 100% completely want your summoners to pump this stat up as high as possible, as soon as possible, whenever possible, so you can use summons more, hit enemy summoners harder, and render their summons more ineffective on yours. Dexterity affects chance to hit, which only occasionally matters, and luck affects something? Luck never goes up automatically, and criticals in Summon Knight 1 are very rare, so it's hard to think of a reason to ever put points into this one. All in all, Summon Knight 1 has a very weird balance. They did not consider these stats very thoroughly, so it winds up in a very weird position where if you pump int on your summoners, you'll demolish enemies very easily. If you don't, you'll kinda get screwed very, very hard. So make sure you have good summoners and good summons. Now, it is very worth mentioning that all of this is very different in the DS port. All of it. Obviously, with all these small mechanical and design issues, when they ported the game to the DS 8 years later, after 3 whole sequels of iteration, Summon Knight 1 was in for some heavy design reworks. Backported quality of life, including a text log, cutscene skip, and summon compendium. Skills that units can learn when leveling up. Buying gear when comparing it with a unit's equipped gear now immediately gives the option to equip it, rather than needing to move to a separate equip menu. Oh my god, they actually did it. Summonite filled treasure chests to refill your rock collection with. Severe early game combat rebalances to make notably brutal encounters easier to work through, a save option in the battle prep screen, working unit selection into an option in the battle prep screen so you can actually see what the map ahead is going to be like before you select your units, instead of selecting your units, not knowing what the map will be like, and selecting a bunch of guys who can't do anything on it, and most severely, backporting a balance change introduced starting in Summon Knight 2. Intelligence split into 2 separate magic attack and magic defense stats. This makes it much harder to pump your summoners up into unstoppable, dimensional-ripping human dynamos. They also removed luck entirely. I guess they realized it didn't really serve any purpose. They also halved the cost for using Power of Contract from 10 MP to 5, one drawback being that now using the actual summon you get costs the full amount of a normal summon, but as a benefit, if you get a super powerful AoE summon, you now won't be forced to put your entire crew at risk unlocking it. You can also skip the animations now, which is nice. They also change how the AI responds to low HP danger states. They don't just run away anymore. Au contraire, even if they do flee, they will come back in for some cheap shots on anyone who looks like they could make a dent in them. This makes the AI less predictable, less abusable, and means you won't have fights dragged out by one little wimp just spending all his turns fleeing as many spaces as he can go. But it can also be a bit frustrating, since it makes them harder to plan around. More of a neutral change to me. Probably for the better if you prefer having more of a challenge in your enemy AI, rather than having them be completely dumb as bricks. This isn't a DS port thing, but I also found out through playing this version that, yeah, Natsumi has access to an 8-directional melee that Aya doesn't. Weird. Not sure why we're getting Genki girl supremacy here, other than the obvious answer that she's, I guess, the more melee-focused one, but still a bit weird. I'm pretty sure they also toned down the free battles, which were originally weirdly brutally balanced and had inconsistent rewards between each other. Mainly this change is nice, since the first clear of each free battle gives a new accessory, so you just permanently lose out on those if you don't do them. You actually get repeats of those accessories now if you repeat the free battles, which is nice because they also made accessories more useful. The biggest additions backported from later games are the party skills and the Brave Clear system, which means we no longer fight, Now we fight with Brave. The way this works is simple. You're given an optional level cap to clear the whole map under. You can ignore it and power level through, but if you stay under that cap and clear it that way, specifically doing so without losing any units, you'll get points towards party skills. Party skills give convenient passive buffs that can be toggled on and off freely. This mostly serves as added QOL here, with the first skill passively giving extra summonite per map. All in all, pretty solid changes, mostly filling in holes in the original game's design, though I do have some qualms about how this specific game handles the Brave Clear system, but it's whatever. At least it serves as more of a guidepost for what level they want you to tackle maps at. Oh yeah, last but not least, the DS version backports much of the summon mechanics of the sequels. There are benefits and drawbacks to this. Summons are, on the whole, a bit deeper. They have more mechanics in place to make them feel like little guys and not little magic spells framed as guys. They have more than one spell per summon now, and unit summons both appear as part of the regular unit lineup with the ability to be leveled up for cheaper costs than the rest of the gang, and have and grant access to their own magic attacks. You'll also get penalized and lose that Brave Clear if one of them dies, just like any other unit, so you really can't treat them as disposably anymore. There are also now summoned communes, a mechanic that gives you an opportunity to hang out with the little guys, rather than using them solely for violent battle, raising this little meter each time. Max it out and you can even set a summon as a unit's favorite, lowering their MP costs. Being a DS game, in this one it takes the form of touchscreen minigames, baby. You see that dirty little orb right there? Just gonna sit there? Let him stay dirty? Not even gonna wipe down his orb goo? Heck no, we clean our orbs here. A clean orb is a Daiyorokobi orb. They did also backport more restrictive affinity mechanics, though. These always existed. Gazelle can only equip nature summons, Raid can only equip machine summons, and so on. Later games assign ranks to a character's affinity, though. This means certain summons require a certain affinity to be cast. Unit summons, at minimum, need a B rank in the associated element, which means nobody but Natsume and Claret will be able to summon the little guys in for much of the early game. Mostly Natsume, with her flat B grades, as the summoner is always restricted to their B and spirit summons. Actually, this is what I thought, but it turns out summoning a unit should only require a C rank, so I really have no idea what's going on here. There's one severe downgrade in presentation as well. The DS did not have enough space to hold all the original's audio data, so while they might have been able to add some fun dual-screen effects to animations, the voice acting is gone, which I think is a bit of a shame because while it's not the best voice acting exactly, there's performances in the original game that I quite like. It's a shame to lose the vocal contrast between Bonosa's hardcore tough guy talk and Kanon's gentler, more polite way of talking, or Cassis's goofy teasing.
君はそれに輪をかけてお気楽ね。何よ、その生意気な態度は。かわいそうだからってせっかく夕ご飯のパン取っといてあげたのに。やっぱ食べちゃおっと。おいしかった。ふふんだ。これに懲りたら少しは立場を考えて行動しなさいよ。
By the way, Cassis's voice actress is Tomoe Hanba, who would go on to voice Etna in Disgaea, marking Summon Night 1 as her precursor role in being your trusty, funny gay girl who may potentially have killed someone. You'll love to see it.
お前な、俺様を起こしたいのか殺したいのか、どっちなんだ？
どっちでも。ああ、いえ、起こしたかったんです。
On the other hand, in a similar way to the Swordcraft Story games on GBA, this removes the odd disconnect of having an unvoiced protagonist, and the oddity of characters whenever they have to say your name, either going conspicuously quiet or, in the best case, fitting in an aitsu. The bigger deal breaker is that some of the music came over a bit weird. Though, where it's most noticeable is definitely the battle theme. Oof. These aren't deal breakers when actually playing on a DS, but it makes the DS port a bit poor as a stand-in for the original game, at least in a vibes sense, and that's a bummer. Because while the game's honestly very nice art and sprite work transferred over pretty well, the music in the original game really is nice to listen to, and while there's a bit of a charm to it in this form, kind of like the crusty, DS-ified Flower, Sun, and Rain tracks, some of it sounds very not right here, just not quite right. They did at least fix the fishing minigame. I'm so grateful that they fixed the fishing minigame. Even if they had to turn it into a touchscreen minigame, it's still just so much better than what it was. The obligatory fishing minigame that some will say is required in order to make a good RPG is the easiest way to make money in the original game. Since battles can be so rough and take a while to get done, it's much easier to spam the accompanying cat watching minigame. Yes, there is a minigame about watching and noting down the poses of cats in order to win fishing bait, and repeat this minigame about 1 billion times for the quick money it gives. And you know, that doesn't sound bad. There's a fun atmosphere to this screen, lots of cute little animations and low-key, relaxing music. One of my favorite tracks in the game, even. But there is one little stipulation. Your hand. This minigame murders your hand. If you don't have a turbo controller, this minigame will annihilate your hand. It will hammer it into jello. It will break your thumb in half and leave you disabled for the rest of your life. It's Mario Party 1 levels of hand decimation. I had to make an auto-fire macro out of concern for my own health. It's that strict. It also kind of fundamentally lies to you in a way I've never seen a fishing minigame do. The power meter almost sort of matters, kind of, but only sometimes. Bait, too. Bait sort of matters, a little, sometimes. It's hard to gauge. It changes chapter by chapter. But for the most part, it's all in the speed you mash. I was, most of the time, able to catch the most valuable fish, a literal catfish that is part cat, part fish, by just holding my turbo macro through the whole thing. Which, yes, meant I was pulling in thousands of dollars per fishing trip by carrying massive sacks of half cat, half fish into Lipre's kitchen.
これって食べられるのかしら
I am so sorry, Lipre. You also get a unique piece of free gear for getting top catch every chapter, usually better than the equivalent piece of always extremely pricey gear available from the shop. Anyway, it's not very good, which is a shame because you have to do it a lot. The DS version's minigame is better. I mean, it sucks to play on a mouse, but the original sucked to play on the hardware it was designed for. I can't record it directly, at least not in great quality, but I've been playing this version off my fat, OG blue DS. And even with years of age, the trademark fat DS busted hinge and the scratch marks of hours of play from a dumb 7-year-old, it feels fine there, so at least on an actual DS or even with a draw pad, this one is pretty inoffensive and better represents the act of fishing. Okay, I know what you're probably actually here for. There are no English translations for Summon Night, neither in patch or subtitled playthrough form. So what actually happens in the wider story? Well, a bit too much to comfortably fit it all in here, but if I don't do my best, you're just never gonna know. So here we go. Summon Night's early going establishes a lot of bigger political ideas about the setting, the class conflict, the poverty the cast lives in, and the relationship summoning has taken in industrial prosperity and, in turn, the decline of local quality of life, the devastation of local farmland to bolster silk trade, the pollution of water, all while presenting the smaller day-to-day life of a close-knit band of rogues embroiled in tense conflict with a power-hungry rival gang, not to mention the underlying tension of whatever secrets Cassis is hiding, and in lighter tones, Lipre's many talents from her cost-saving knitting skills that allow her to make clothes for everyone without having to buy from shops, and her ongoing cooking quest to uncover the secret of what Aya described to her as the ramen bowl. Where things properly start to develop in the plot is around chapters 5 and 6. What Cassis originally told us was a summon ritual had gone wrong, and that was what brought us here. She ends up admitting that she had a bit more context around it, and technically, she should have killed Aya for demonstrating her unusual powers of summoning several hours earlier. That was her job, after all, her duty. She couldn't, though. She didn't want to. Not after seeing the kind of person Aya is. Anyway, while they were out on their date, they met a big buff swordsman guy clad in all red, which seems to spook Raid a bit. Chapter 6 concerns Aya's attempt to end the ongoing gang war by speaking directly to Banosa's right-hand man, Kanon. He seems like the most talkative one in the bunch. Sure enough, Kanon's willing to talk, but his words are pretty directly that Banosa is never gonna listen. And having sworn a pact with him he refuses to break, he's not going to hold back on us if it comes to blows, which it inevitably does when Banosa catches Aya chatting him up. It's here that the gang learns of Kanon's half-Oni blood, and Banosa's madness. The reason he's become so aggressive of late is exactly because of Aya. Her summon power is something he covets, and he can't accept not having it under his control. In Banosa's eyes, he and Kanon are both without place, without family, and Banosa is too insecure to accept any hands held out his way.
俺様は絶対に諦めねえ。死ぬまで絶対に諦めねえ。 ずてめえらをぶっ潰してやる。
Chapter 7 starts a bit more lackadaisical. On tax day, one of the friends we made in an earlier chapter, Jinga, a cocky little wandering martial artist who's forced his way under our tutelage out of respect for the combat prowess we demonstrated when we rescued him after he made the interesting choice of wandering right into gang territory, wearing a sign challenging people to fight him for money, invites Aya to go out to check the soldiers gathering up at the local park. Aya mostly goes with him to make sure he doesn't try to punch any of them in the face and get pierced by 1,000 lances. Of course, nowhere knights are gathering up on tax day is going to be somewhere they're gathering for peaceful purposes. Man, woman, and child, they've rounded up all the dirty non-taxpayers to send them off to work off their debts in the factories. One of the men they've rounded up starts talking back, a red-haired thief caught for robbing the rich and giving to the poor. He challenges one of the knights to kill him if they want him to shut up.
市民からの税金を力で奪い取って立派な盗人様だろうがこいつだ口を慎め殺せよ殺さなきゃ俺の口は止まらんぞほざいたな
We came here to keep Jinga in check, but letting them abuse this guy would just be fucked. Before we can charge in, though, the same man who explained what these people were rounded up for just a moment ago shouts out to stop us. He says, whether we charge in or not, everything will be fine.
呆れたものだな。都合の悪いことを力で消し去ろうと。
It's with that the red-clad swordsman from a few days ago bursts onto the scene. The disgraced former knight captain, Lambda, leader of the revolutionary group, acute. They're declaring full-on revolution, holy shit! The man who stopped us reveals himself as one of his associates, Pelgo, along with their other two officers, the beautiful martial arts doctor, Cecile, and the shadowy assassin, Stout. With everything heating up like this, Aya and Jinga decide to rush home. Telling everyone of the valiant revolution, Raid bursts in the moment he hears Lambda's name. Turns out Lambda was Raid's old captain, and what got him kicked out of the ranks was a combination of covering for Raid's own act of charity to save the poor, though mostly it was plotting from the Mon brothers, who wanted any dirty sympathizers of the poors out of the castle. Raid resolves to go question Lambda about what he fully intends to do with this revolution. I'd assume it's to overthrow a dictatorship and grant people autonomy in their lives, but hey, you'd never know, I guess. Meanwhile, the Mon brothers, eldest Imran and youngest Kimran, without showing the slightest bit of concern for the present situation, decide there's no big loss in using their summoning techniques to just demolish the corner of the factories where the revolt is at its fiercest.
交換術を使って工場の一部を破壊するゴミと一緒に燃やすのは忍びない
Ilias stays quiet and accepts his orders to deal with the riffraff. When Raid finally gets face to face with Lambda, Lambda gives a simple answer. He knew this would be pointless from the start. In Acute's eyes, the people have grown too complacent with the summoner's rule, unwilling to stand up for themselves, too used to the years of abuse, of being beaten down. Nobody believes they can actually fight, and if no one stokes the flames of revolution, then at this rate, they'll never fight back. This pisses Raid off pretty hard. Our JRPG party idealism gives us a firm belief that no good can be achieved in such bloody revolution, that Acute knowing there will be sacrifices means their way is wrong. Lambda challenges our idea of bringing change without sacrifice by directing us over to the thief from earlier, Lucas. If we want victory without sacrifice, we'd better focus more on saving his butt and less on kicking Lambda's. It's cheeky, but you can't say he doesn't have a point. This is definitely where the more thematic stuff of Summon Night kinda starts to chafe against its political subjects. The logical progression after witnessing the early sparks of revolution is a trip to the circus. Wait, hang on a second. Oh. It's Ripley. Wait, Ripley's voiced by Yukari Tamura? She's the voice of Rika Furude from Higurashi no Naku Koro ni?
泣いちゃダメです、さとこ。ファイト、おーです。
Oh, she's also Rosalind in Disgaea too.
いかにも。世は魔王ゼノンの一人娘、ロザリンドなり。
So we've got two Disgaea heroines, years before Disgaea. Huh. Anyway, Ripley thinks Aya's looking down, so she hands her a ticket and tells her to go with the kids, claiming she's just too busy with these house chores to go herself, so alas, she must hand it off to someone else.
やだな。私はあなたに用事を頼んだだけじゃない。お礼なんて。
Nothing really plot-heavy happens this chapter, but Aya rescues Monati, a girl from the wild land of Maitrapa from slavery, along with her little mascot animal friend Gaum. And... okay, I promise this is the last time I'll do this, but Gaum's voice actor is the same as Claret, who we would have gotten in Cass's place if I'd chosen Natsumi at the start instead of Aya. More importantly, she is Yuri Shiratori, voice of Mokona from Magic Knight Rayearth, as well as the voice of Rena from Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere.
心の入れ物でしかないのなら、私には意味のないものだなって。いつも心で飛んでるんです。
I just feel these things are important to point out. There's a sweet little speech from Aya about how she feels she could have ended up where Monati is if the gang didn't take her in. And Monati is pretty cute, and I'm cool with her. She even has a helpful webpage. Not sure how to feel about her calling Aya Master, though. Chapter 9 involves the gang rescuing the kids from a fatal disease, something they're only able to do thanks to making the acquaintance of Akane the ninja, disciple of Shion, who runs a little-known medicine shop down the corner. Hailing from the Oni land of Siltern, they mark another node in our growing web of other-dimensional drifters. This is, again, a very sweet little chapter where we help her gather some herbs to make the medicine, having an honorable little fight with Ilias and Sizelith, as while Ilias was commanded as captain of the knights to prioritize the herb for the rich folk, and he will honor his vow as a knight, it won't be dishonoring his vow if he just gets pushed away by a powerful opponent, I guess. Chapter 10 brings Acute back into the spotlight, casually knocking on our front door and asking Aya to use her powerful summoning skills to assist in an assassination op on Imran Man. Personally, I wouldn't say no, but Raid butts in and tells them not to get innocent people involved in their black ops, before Lambda makes it clear nobody consulted him about this and he personally never meant to ask us, as well as firing back on Raid for leaving the Knights after Lambda had faith in him to stay part of their ranks and try to right the ship in his absence. I find the next bit of the scene a bit odd, because Cassis busts in to question Lambda if he realizes what kind of impact killing one of the summoners will have on a city that's built all its industry on top of summoning currently. Both she and Raid make the point that cutting off the head of that industry will have an impact on the city itself. And that is true, but I'm a bit surprised they don't bring up the fact that the farmland is polluted beyond relief now. That's one of the first things they establish in the game, that the entire wasteland is what used to be Saigent's farmland. And that feels like a more, sensible argument against the idea that killing Imran will return the city back to its former self. It can't. The farms are gone. The farmland is gone. I don't know. I think it's weird that they don't use that good reason that they set up earlier in the game for this scene. I guess you could read that as the more general implication for what they're trying to tell Lambda here. I don't know, whatever. More than anything, though, Raid just feels guilty. He blames himself for what Lambda is doing now, for not sticking with the Knights and trying to fix the situation from the inside. Now Lambda's resorting to the most drastic of actions, all because Raid couldn't match up to his wishes for him. He wants to stop Lambda before he dirties his hands, sacrificing his honorable name to enact the change he wishes for. The gang knows Imran is set to take part in the demonstration of the city's new steam train, so after much deliberation and asking the literal assassin we have hanging out with us what kind of assassination scheme she'd think up, we determine the assassination plot potentially, very possibly, probably involves the train. We show up just in the nick of time, pushing the old poor hater out to safety, and confront Lambda about all his big meanie things he keeps doing before everyone just sort of awkwardly decides to buzz off post-battle. After the stunt we pulled the previous day, the next chapter focuses on Acute deciding to make one thing extremely clear. They are definitely not going to kill us all. For real, actually. They invite Aya and Raid over to their bar to have some small talks, and surprisingly, these talks do not involve knocking either of us unconscious or killing us. Well, not us. Raid has a private talk with Lambda and comes out of it looking pretty grim. When he goes missing a few hours later, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what those talks were about. We send everyone up and down town, searching for Raid, asking about his whereabouts, and in the end, our one lead is Bonosa. After humiliating ourselves to get him to cough up the info, we finally get a destination. The Swamp of Death. Bonosa laughs for a bit about how Raid's probably already dead and getting dissolved in all the swamp muck, but maybe we can still find his bones. Thanks for the word of support, buddy. Wish we could all be so optimistic. By the time we arrive, Raid and Lambda are already in the midst of their duel. The other members of Acute have no bad blood with us, but they refuse to let us interrupt, so we've got a fight on our hands either way. By this point in the game, Aya and Cassis are pretty beefed up brain-wise, so none of them are much threat. Pound our way through, and Aya storms right in between the two very angry, very sweaty knights, who are so angrily baring their swords and glaring at each other, caught in their own moment, thinking only of piercing each other with their massive swords of glittering steel. The former captain and his former subordinate, tied together through bonds of destiny and intense, passionate disagreement that can only be resolved through puncturing each other's bodies. Aya proposes another way. We don't have to kill each other, nobody has to kill anyone. Now, the way I've phrased it all, you might think this is an arc about how killing is bad, and Lambda needs to stop thinking about killing people to effect the change he wants. That's half true. What the gang is actually moralizing at Lambda about isn't the killing itself, though. They're angry that he's making himself a sacrifice, in a metaphorical sense, by bearing the weight of instigating such violent revolution that he knows will take so many lives. Lambda has friends in Acute too, who care about him. We can't let the big guy throw himself to the wolves when he's got such dear friends. Aya's passionate speech focuses on how both of us have the same goals. We don't have to come to violence over it, and Lambda doesn't have to turn himself into a criminal to achieve what he wants. If we all work together, we can find a better way. Surprisingly, this argument works. Lambda's totally into it. We're now best buddies with the city's most wanted, gaining 4 additional units. I'd like to say these units are notably good, but they aren't. Also, Bonosa charges in afterwards and can use summons now.
こういうことがな。
That seems bad. After all that preamble, including a bit more with a side quest about rescuing a racist elk girl who hails from the same world as Monity, and who constantly shouts slurs at everyone, especially Monity.
ねえ、エルカがどうしてレビットと同じ部屋で過ごさなくちゃなんないのよ。できない。エルカさん、見てるとイライラしてきちゃうのよ。何をするにもエルカの倍の時間がかかるし。
Chapter 12 finally begins with the main plot of the game. No more pretensions about politics or anything. This chapter we meet two out-of-towners, summoners representing the Blue faction, a nobler counterpart to the Gold faction who prize ethical use of summoning, rather than utilizing it for profit. Gazelle initially suspects the hooded one, Gibson, of being Banosa's mysterious teacher, leading to a very funny moment where you're tailing behind him and he stops in the middle of the road to call us out. When we step out though, he's like, "Oh, are you also following me?" Before we encounter a second hidden group of assuredly badder dudes to fight besides him. Gibson and his partner Mimosa tell the gang they've come here in search of one object, the Jewel of Nima, a powerful artifact that can amplify a summoner's powers and call on dark entities. They know it's here in Sigent, but not much more than that. Deciding to lend a hand, since we're in this deep already, using info Mimosa gathered up, we track its location to an abandoned corner of the factory district, held in the possession of none other than our buddy Banosa. It all comes down to yet more fighting. This is one of the first really difficult main story fights in the game, since they split your group up and Banosa has a pretty deadly summon he can unleash if you don't mute him first. In the end, Banosa's got too much plot armor, so no matter how hard the group hits him, he always gets away. Having a night talk with Cassis, she mentions that Aya's probably best off not getting involved with those mysterious, black-garbed men from earlier, which only sounds more ominous. The chapter after this is where things start getting nuts. Banosa's not holding back with that power he got. Without hesitation, he just stormed right into the castle with an army of summons. At this point, we're the only ones who really stand a chance against him, so everyone gears up and heads out to fight. There is an optional side quest to unlock Ripley as a unit in this chapter. I did not fulfill the requirements to get it. We arrive just in time to lend a helping hand to Ilias and Sizelith, who officially join our group with nowhere else to go now that the Mon brothers have retreated with Sigent's nameless, faceless, feudal lord in tow. No matter how handily Banosa is beaten though, plot armor is plot armor, and he hits back with a cutscene attack. It seems like all hope is lost until everyone wakes up in a strange, otherworldly space. This is where we finally get the grander plot dump. We were rescued from Banosa's assault and called into this space by the Elgo, the entities who make up the borders between worlds. They were originally established several centuries ago, while now Lindbaumians are the ones in a position of power. Before that, it was the other worlds that were more of a threat. They were toast without a way to force them back to their own worlds, ascending magic, and the Elgo were formed to maintain more of a balance from there. But the borders they formed weren't quite unbreakable steel. They weakened over time, and the sending magic was reverse engineered into a power to pull instead, to drill little holes in the border, and pull beings out of their native worlds. Every summon weakens the borders just that bit more, and someone behind the curtain worked to fully crumble one of them to pieces. We've lost the Elgo of Sapareth, the spirit world, and without it, things are majorly screwed. The fabric of the world could actively be unraveled at this point, and every summon Banosa does, in particular, wears those strands down more than anything or anyone else. Thus, the Elgo's only hope is Aya. Whatever power she has, it allows her to attain the status of Linker. If she can pass each of the Elgo's trials, she'll get access to their power, and get one step closer to fixing this balance. Sounds easy enough. Throw me at him. Well, maybe don't throw me at this one. The first trial here is easily the most difficult. It's a mirror match against souped-up versions of all our starting guys. Pretty mean to throw you into without a save in between, but beatable. The chapter after is the most open the game gets, and just involves doing 3 more maps at 3 more locations to clear 3 more trials. There's also a pair of important side quests to clear first. Early in the game, if you met an old dude named Weasel, you can finish his chain of scenes here. He's one of those wandering mystical swordsmith types, and he gives you the best weapon in the entire game, a sword made of summonite. The other is a little ninja test for Akane, and one of the rare major choices you get to make in the game that affects more than some relationship points. If Akane wins, you get one of the best accessories in the game, granting access to some exclusive and powerful summons. If she loses, you get her master, Shion, a decently strong but not quite overwhelmingly so late-game unit. The Elgo trials themselves are nothing special. The characters they introduce are fun, and you finally get to bump heads with the sword dragon from the game's cover. But they're easy maps, and the characters you meet are coming in too late to get much writing. Storming the castle to kick Bonosa out afterwards is a bit harder, but not overwhelmingly so. Alas, while everyone wanted to hope Bonosa was just ignorantly destroying the fabric of space-time, it turns out he was totally aware of it and didn't really care. He's gone full Joker mode already. He's just about ready to fight the gang to the death, but the real villain behind the curtains makes his appearance. Oldrake, head of the Servold family, leader of the world's largest summoner terrorist organization, father of Cassis, owner of the world's largest forehead. He lays it all out for us. Cassis wasn't entirely lying about her summoning being an accident. She was selected out of Oldrake's many children to sacrifice herself, to summon Sapareth's Elgo so that Oldrake might use its powers to summon the Demon Lord, destroy the world, and reshape it in his own image. Cassis did not succeed in carrying out that plan. Rather than dying to summon the Elgo, Cassis's ritual killed all the other summoners and pulled us in instead, burying a piece of the Demon Lord's power inside us. That's why Aya was capable of so much crazy shit. She's literally part Demon Lord. God damn. With that, Oldrake just tells Cassis if she wants their place back by his side, she'll have to kill us all herself, and then buzzes right off. This is something Cassis does not do. She doesn't even begin to do it. How could she do it? Ultimately, everyone's sort of just left standing there, awkwardly. The next day, we get bad news from Gibson. He's reported everything that's happened to the Blue faction, and they've made their decision. They won't hurt Aya or Cassis, but they are going to arrest them, to put them in captivity. It is pretty dangerous to just leave a Demon Lord girl and her terrorist baby girlfriend to run amok like that. Mimosa is disgusted with him, though, and formally resigns from her position in the Blue faction, feeling awful about treating her friends like that. Everyone tries to spring plans with Aya and Cassis to help them escape, but they both give in. They don't see much else for them to do that won't bring more unnecessary violence. Unfortunately for them, unnecessary violence is basically all the gang knows how to do. Halfway down the march to the Blue faction's prison complex, all our boys bust in to save our butts, giving inspiring speeches of how valuable we are to them, and how they could never abandon us like that, including Mimosa, who told everyone the exact route we'd probably be taking.
バカな。我々を敵に回すというのか。
あなたたちにあなたたちの考えがあるように、私たちにも譲れないものがある。私たちは二人を信じる。そのためなら、あえてあなたたちとも戦う。
二人は俺たちの大切な仲間なんだ。理由はそれで十分だ。そうだろ？
行くぞみんな。
姉子は自分の力の使い方を間違えるような弱い人間じゃねえ。
戦いが生み出す悲しみをその人たちは知っているんです。
何も知らない貴様たちがどうこうする権利なんてないのさ。
俺たちはな、そいつに助けられてんだよ。私たちの進もうとした道が間違っていると諭してもらったんです。
傷つけ合うだけが道ではないことを教えてくれたわ。
だから今度は俺たちが助ける番だ。
魔王の力がどうだっていうのさ。私はそんなの気にしないんだから。そうですの。モナティはマスターが誰より優しいことを知ってるですの。 自分のことより人の気持ちを考えちゃうお人よしなんだからね。だからこそ関係ないはずのこの世界のために戦ってくれている。
それがどれほどのことなのか、あなたたちには分かっているのか。
忘れていたよ。君たちは理屈ではなく、もっと純粋な気持ちでつながっていたこと。正しい答えなどどこにもないんだ。大切なのはその答えを正しいと思えるのかどうかだ。
Even Gibson ends up joining in. In the end, the blue faction reps sent to haul us in, Grams, gives in and lets us run off to do whatever big inspiring JRPG party shit we've got planned. If you've been aiming for the true end like I have, then this is where Aya and Cassis have one final night talk. All of Cassis's secrets have been laid out in the open. The reason she could never tell them to Aya is because she was scared that Aya would hate her for it, would never forgive her. Aya's reasoning is simple. She can't hate a precious friend who's saved her ass this many times already. If Cassis had ill intent, she would have had countless opportunities to kill the gang off already. And besides, if Cassis wasn't here by her side, Aya's convinced she would have given in to despair at some point along this long road, broken down crying. Cassis asks Aya if she remembers that voice, the one that brought her here. Aya said it sounded like Cassis's voice back when she brought it up. Cassis tosses out her own theory for what that was. During the ritual, she was troubled, questioning herself about whether what she was doing was okay, whether it was fine to help her father destroy the world like this. Those worries took voice deep in her heart, a voice crying out for help.
自分のやっていることが正しいことなのか、本当に世界を滅ぼしてしまってもいいのか、答えを出せずに心の中で悲鳴を上げていたの。助けてって。私の心の叫びだったのかもしれない。思い込みかもしれない。でも君は答えてくれた。本当にありがとう。君がいなかったら私本当の自分に会えてなかったかも。だから約束する。絶対に君を元の世界に返すって。今度は私が君を守ってみせる。
Aya and Cassis make an oath to each other, to protect one another, to stay by each other's side, to the end. From here, it's all straight to endgame. Tracking down Uldric's ceremony location up to high in the northern mountains, the gang initially gets caught between a rock and a hard place, breaking through the first perimeter of guards, only to get some unexpected backup from the Mon brothers. Not sure how I feel about getting help from these creeps, but alright. Kanon is hesitant to fight us, wanting to stay loyal to Banosa up to the end, and feeling bad for how much he thinks Banosa has suffered seeing us, with all that sweet max int summon brain power and high levels he's always wished he could have. So the gang makes it clear to him that nobody is here to hurt Banosa. We're all just here to try and de-jokerify him and pull him out of his crazy obsession with power and loneliness. Banosa, as unresponsive to hero speeches as ever, butts in and we all have one final fight, one of the tougher ones in the game. At the end of all that, Kanon finally makes his choice. He joins up with us in trying to talk down Banosa, to convince him that he has a place to be. A place by Kanon's side.
バノッサさん、もうよしましょう。
カノン。
僕はあなたに拾ってもらった時、最後まであなたのそばにいることを誓いました。どんな道であろうと、あなたが望むところへついていこうと思っていたんです。あなたのそばだけが僕にとっての居場所だったから。だけどもうこれ以上は黙ってられません。バノッサさん、僕はあなたを失いたくない。他の誰が何と言おうと、あなた自身が自分を不要だと思っても、それでも 僕にはあなたのことが必要なんです。
カノン、バノッサよ、もうこれ以上自分を憎むのはよすんだ。ここにお前の居場所はちゃんとあるんだ。お前の価値を認めてくれる人がいるんだ。あとはお前がそれに気づくだけなんだ。
バノッサさん、
俺は
It's a sweet moment that's then interrupted by old Drake being a bitch and guilt-tripping Banosa into going insane, blasting Kanon to death the moment he tries to stop him.
もうこれ以上あなたにバノッサさんの心を自由にはさせない。
目障りだな。消えるがいい。
カノン、目を開けろ。カノン、カノン、カノ
ンバノッサよ、これで本当にお前の居場所はなくなったな。
Banosa's too distraught to fight us here. It's just us versus Old Drake, and 5 or 6 of his generics. Thankfully, Old Drake is conveniently placed just close enough to instantly blast him and 2 of his guys with an endgame AoE summon, so it's not that hard of a fight. But it's too little, too late in the end. Banosa's already halfway into beef jerky. Old Drake is so caught up in his victory lap, he gleefully congratulates Banosa, his son.
そしてバノッサ、お前は果報者だ。一度は捨てられながら最後の最後で栄光をつかんだのだ。
なんだと。
父は嬉しいぞ、我が息子よ。
貴様がそうだったのか。
もう何をするバノッサ。
許さねえ。母さんを、そしてこの俺を捨てたお前だけは絶対に許さねえ。
Without hesitating, he just straight up murks the old man then and there. I guess the only thing that can break cutscene armor is someone else's stronger cutscene armor. In his final moments, Banosa begs Aya to kill him, while he's still himself. But Aya just can't bring herself to do it.
バカ。やろう。
For a moment, everything looks bleak. But Aya looks inside her heart. She remembers the voice that called her into Lindbaum. She remembers her promise to Cassis. She remembers that no matter what happens, she must protect her.
光だ。あの時と同じ光。
私たちを何度も救ってくれた光。
あいつの光だ。
Aya shouts from her core, draws upon the power inside her to fulfill her promise, to protect those important to her. Let's kick Satan's ass. The final fight of Summon Night is fairly drawn out and not easy to intuit at first, using some strange and unique gimmicks. The main thing to keep in mind is the boss's adds. They all need to be dead or every hit you deal to it is only going to be 1 point of damage, which is not a lot against a guy with 999 HP. The real hard part is after that, though. Once you've killed them and entered Phase 2, the Demon Lord starts firing off AoE attacks every turn that hit hard. You can't dodge them, so it's basically a damage race. Every 3 turns, the boss will pause its attack, and that's your cue to clear out, because he's about to do a much wider AoE right in front of him that hits for a whopping 250 damage. This fight had me on the brink towards the end, all but 2 of my units dead. There's a trick, though. A trick that makes this fight doable no matter how many units you've got, as long as you've got the HP and the defense to tank a hit. The boss's normal AoE will always center on a single unit if it can't find a group to hit. If you stand right next to it, the splash will always hit the boss itself for 50 HP. With how high its defense against attacks and summons is, that's basically the hardest you can hit this guy. So if you've stocked up on healing items, the easiest way to beat him is, in fact, to just stand next to him and face tank this stuff for the next 20 turns or so. I had that much healing in stock, so I ended up just doing that. Bam! With the Demon Lord returned to Soppereth, the Elgo appear to speak to Aya for one last time, resurrecting that world's Elgo. Turns out the fragment of the Demon Lord hiding within us was that guy the entire time. At the end of her journey, Aya is faced with one last decision. The borders she assembles here will be as she chooses. Aya makes her choice to create full, unbendable, eternal borders between worlds, returning all creatures to their homes and ending summon magic forever. Aya wakes up, surrounded by friends, all worried about her. They tell her that the darkness is fading, the Demon Lord defeated, and thank her for saving them all. Aya can't accept those thanks, though. This was a fight we all won, together, with our combined strength. We all saved the world. All Aya was doing was honoring her promise. A promise to protect Cassis. Suddenly, a flash of light flares out and drops of light rain from the sky. The light of returning magic. Aya's going home too.
ちょっと待てよ。まさかこれでお別れだっていうのかよ。なんとか言えよ。
やめるんだガゼル。
辛いのは俺だけじゃない。
Everyone has to say their tearful goodbyes, but there's one person who's more frustrated about this than anyone else.
やだよ。私君と別れたくない。だって私の居場所は君のそばにしかないんだもん。約束して離れてもまた会えるってこれっきりじゃないって。
With that promise, Aya and Cassis say goodbye, but not forever. Someday.
た君と会えたんだ。
Bitches find a way, I guess. Of course, that's not the only ending, or even the canon one. Summon Night 1 has a total of 4 endings. The Summoner's ending, otherwise called the Romance ending, was, at the time of release at least, considered the true one, I think, since it wraps up the main threads between the protagonist and the Summoner, the two central characters of the story. But the other endings include the normal ending, in which Aya would remain in Lindbaum, and while the borders would be repaired, summon arts would not be sealed off. The hero ending, which I actually don't know what goes down in that one, and the Demon Lord or Karma ending. Endings are decided by character relationship values. The normal ending is achieved by having high points with most of the characters, really. The hero ending is achieved if your highest value is with any of the more traditionally heroic characters, like Raid, Akane, or any of the members of Acute. So it's the one that would touch back on some of the political stuff with Saigent, I guess. Makes me curious, but not enough to do a full replay for that one. The Karma ending is the weird one. It's a bit akin to those bad ends in Disgaea that are contingent on team killing a certain number of guys. You wouldn't realize it exists here without really going out of your way, though. It requires you to team kill your own units about 100 times to pile up as much bad karma as humanly possible. You can get it from making more cowardly and bad choices in dialogue, too, but that's not likely to accumulate enough points on its own. I'd love to show you these endings, but I don't know if I can bring myself to replay the whole game front to back within the time of putting this video together. That's a full-ass RPG, man. I might have to bend on this a bit for Karma ends in future games, because those can get wild. Summon Night 1 is messy. It is troubled. Its mechanics raw, its writing enjoyable and momentarily interesting, but unfocused and simultaneously too rushed and too compressed. It spends hours on political texturing that's initially interesting, but ends up largely being outside its zone of thematic interest. I don't think it's necessarily wrong for Summon Night to have leaned so much harder towards simple RPG themes of friendship and connection, but if I had a dime for every PS1 strategy RPG that starts off with a very politically centered plot and then recenters around evil magic demon rocks, well, it would be interesting that I'd have 2 of them. In a weird sense, it's not impossible to see how the game lands here. Summon Night wants to be a story about a big gang of wholesome buddy boys who create a home for each other and fight to keep each other safe and happy. That's all fine, but it means a lot of the political pretext is there to create this situation without an actual long-term interest in the politics of the text itself. That said, I look back less negatively on this game because I have played the sequels. I played 3, and 3's pretty good. Not perfect, but I think they do eventually figure out how to balance the JRPG adventure tone and the heavier social ideas in less clumsy ways. Summon Night 1 has ambition and often has a lot of charm, but it's the sort of game that needed iteration to get to somewhere better. Still, I enjoyed my time with it a lot. It's weird in ways that are memorable, and as busted as the base mechanics are, there is something fun to figuring them out and breaking the harder maps over your knee. The DS version is the superior game, but there's still reasons to play the original. They're somewhat different flavors of game, and the original has enough originality to stand on its own 2 legs. And I think the ending is why I overall have a pretty positive view of it. It's more common in modern interpretations for the Isekai-e to stay in their new world, and it was still more common to see the world treated with that sort of permanence in some classical Isekai fantasy stories. In Summon Night's case, I think it would have been very frustrating to follow up a statement from the main character, like the one in the opening. If I keep going like this, I'll be fine, but I think I'll miss something more important to me, with an ending where she just goes back home, taking her adventure in Lindbaum as a coming-of-age thing. There's a bit of this undertone of our hero just not being someone who entirely feels comfortable conforming to the real-world society they live in. feeling alone in it on some very personal level. This is only strengthened with a gay or lesbian protagonist and summoner. This idea that our character is being faced with the future of getting married, raising kids, becoming a conventional parent, something they don't have present objection to, but something they clearly voice some level of disinterest in. If there was an ending where she just returned to some kind of, regular Earth norm, I think it would kind of betray everything interesting about that. So it's good that there isn't. And it's good that there are even endings where, the whole situation with the borders around Lindbaum is left more open. It's goofy, it's silly, it's lighthearted, it's childish, and it's kind of beautiful. It's the sign of Summon Knight's optimism and belief in its characters that shines through all its imperfections and makes the game so hard to dislike. Even as it fumbles in so many different threads of its narrative, it always makes you kinda happy for all your little dudes. In short, I give Summon Knight 1 7 Powans out of 5.